So this screencast is titled Clearing Up the Confusion About jQuery Events. And when I first started out with JavaScript and jQuery, I struggled a little bit with the concept of events. You know, what did bind mean? What are event handlers and event listeners? And what does delegate do? And what is that E that people pass into functions? Like, this was never really properly explained to me, and I found it kind of conceptually challenging to wrap my head around. And I was inspired to record this screencast because just recently have I really started feeling comfortable with using events in jQuery and JavaScript. And there were really three epiphanies that led me to that point where I started to really kind of understand what was going on and really feel comfortable. So I wanted to record this screencast to share with you those three epiphanies, and hopefully if you're just starting out with JavaScript and jQuery, you're going to find this really helpful because it'll help you avoid some of those common pitfalls that people fall into, and it'll help you kind of avoid some of that frustration that comes with not really understanding what's going on. So I have a blank index.html file right here, and let's load it up with a little bit of code, and then let's analyze what's going on, and let me kind of explain to you what's going on with jQuery events and the three epiphanies I had that really helped me understand it. So first things first, I'm going to go over to the Google CDN and grab the jQuery link. You really should link to jQuery through the Google CDN because your page is going to load faster if you do, but if you want to host it locally, that's fine also. And then I'm going to write just a little bit of HTML that's going to serve as our boilerplate for this little lecture here. So first things first, I'm going to make a div with an ID of container, and this is kind of going to be the div that I wrap around the entire project. Then I'm going to make another div with an ID I'm going to call button list. And what goes in a button list? How about 3 buttons? I'm going to call them button 1, button 2, and button 3. And then one more thing I'm going to add. I'm going to add a div with a class of red box, which is just going to be a big red box that's going to kind of help us visually see some things that are going on. Then I'm going to add some quick CSS styling to make this a little bit more visually appealing and, you know, kind of show you what's going on. I'm going to give the container a width of 500 pixels and margin 0 auto to center it so that what you see is centered in the page. I'm going to give each button just a margin of 15 pixels. And then I'm going to make the red box into an actual red box. Let's give it a height of 100 pixels, a width of 100 pixels, background color of red, and then give it some margin. Let's say 25 pixels, 0, 0, 90 pixels, and then we're not going to touch the CSS again for the rest. I mean, that's just to kind of make this a little bit clearer when I show you what I want to write. And then we're going to write a jQuery function. Now, if you are familiar at all with jQuery, what I'm about to write is going to look incredibly familiar to you. In fact, you might think like you understand perfectly what's happening. But, you know, it kind of actually took me a while to understand what is really going on in this function. So let's write it and then let's analyze what it's doing. So document.ready, which is how you see most jQuery functions start, with an anonymous function called on the document.ready, and then let's write button.click function redbox.toggle. And if you don't know what toggle does, toggle is just a jQuery method that says if something is hidden on the page, show it, and if it's shown on the page, hide it. So let's go to my code. I'm running this at localhost 3000 because that's where I'm running my HTML file, and you're going to see that I have 3 buttons and a red box. Each time I click a button, the red box toggles and it works on all 3 buttons. Simple enough, but this is going to illustrate a very important point that I want to make. If we go back to the code, let's analyze what is actually happening in this function, because it might not be what you think is happening in the function, and the difference is subtle, but the difference is super important. Now, my first epiphany that I had that helped me understand jQuery events was that there is a pattern to to the functions that you write in jQuery. This pattern will encompass almost every jQuery line of code that you write. And the pattern is this: when something happens, select something and then do something. I'm going to repeat that again. When something happens, select something and do something. And I like, and this really helped me out when I first started writing jQuery, to think of every line of code that I was writing in those terms. Like, actually speak it out in English, what the code was doing in the terms of when something happens, select something, do something. So if you're just starting out with jQuery and I asked you, explain to me in English what is happening in this script, I think what most people would say is that you're saying when a button is clicked, toggle the red box. And that makes intuitive sense. That's what I think most people would think is happening. And if you look at the page, it's what seems like is going on. When you click a button, toggle the red box. But I challenge you, think about it in the terms of when something happens, select something and do something. So if you ask someone who's kind of just starting out with this stuff, I think what most people would then say is that, okay, when the button is clicked, select the red box and toggle it. That's your when something's happening, select something, do something. When a button is clicked, select the red box and toggle it. And that's kind of a logical next step that you would make. And I understand why people would think like that, but that's wrong. That's not what's actually going on. And the way that I would then, counter that is say, okay, if that is what is happening in this function, if that's what's happening, if you're saying when a button is clicked, select the red box and then toggle it, then what is this document.ready part? What is that? Why is that there? And I think that the response to that from a beginner would be, well, that's just saying run this when the document is ready, right? Because you run HTML top to bottom. So if you didn't have the document.ready, this would crawl down and it would say, oh, button.click function, but there is no button, so that would be like confusion. So the document.ready is saying when the document is ready, execute this code. But I ask you, if that's the case, then how does that fit into the pattern of when something happens, select something, do something? And it doesn't. If what this is saying is that when a button is clicked, select the red box and toggle it, then this doesn't, not only does this not fit into the pattern of what I just said, but you don't even need it. Right? Like, if what this is saying is when a button is clicked, select the red box and toggle it, why would you even need the document.ready function? Why would you even need that component? Because it wouldn't matter if this is called before the HTML loads, because it's not going to be triggered unless you clicked a button. But you're going to see, right, if I commented out this document.ready part here, if I went and commented it out, and then ran this code, nothing would happen. It wouldn't work. So there must be something else going on. There must be something else that's going on here that we don't. And if you still don't believe me, I'm going to prove it to you. So if I go to my localhost 3000 and I reload the page and I open up my console, I'm going to go ahead and insert a button into the DOM. I'm going to call button list. I'm going to select the button list and I'm going to append to it some HTML that just creates another button. Now, if what is really going on in this function is that I'm saying whenever you click a button, toggle the red box, right? Then when I click the button 4, right? If I inspect this element real quick, it's just in the DOM as a button. So if what's really happening is you toggle the red box on a button click, then clicking button 4 should work. But you're going to see right now it doesn't. Clicking button 4 does not affect the box. And the other buttons do. So wait a minute. I thought when I click a button, it's supposed to toggle the box, but it doesn't. And you're going to see this a lot. You're always going to be creating DOM elements dynamically, right? Either the user's going to create it, you're going to create it when something happens, you're going to make an AJAX request that pulls JSON data and creates an object in the DOM, and it's not going to work with your events. So what is really going on? Why isn't that working? And we need to go back to the code and actually analyze what is happening here. So hopefully I've convinced you that the correct pattern is not when a button is clicked, toggle the red box. It's actually something slightly different, and this slight difference makes all the difference. What is happening here is this function is saying, when the document is ready, select all the buttons and bind to these buttons an event listener. All right, let me repeat that. When the document is ready, select all the buttons on the page and bind to those buttons a click listener, a listener for the click event, right? The jQuery selector button just returns an array of buttons. Let me load the page and do that again. It's going to return an array of buttons, right? It returns an array of the 3 buttons that are on the page. So when the document is ready, make this selection, which returns an array of 3 buttons, and then bind to those buttons an event listener. Bind an event handler. Event listener, event handler are kind of the same terminology, which just mean like like some intelligence to that button that tells it to listen for click events and to respond to them if they encounter it. And you can kind of now start to see why the appended button had no effect, because I'm selecting this array and I'm binding to each of these items a listener for the click event. Now when I dynamically create that button onto the page, this function has already run its course, and this button never had the event bound to it, so it doesn't know to listen for it. It doesn't know to listen for that click, but the other buttons do. So that's the first epiphany I had, is that what's really going on here is it's saying when the document is ready, select buttons, and not when you click a button. It's when the document is ready, select all the buttons and give them click listeners to listen for the click event. And that subtle difference really helped me kind of figure out like why my Ajax wasn't working. So then the question becomes, well, how do I get it so that this button works when I click it and it still has the same effect as the other ones, even if it was created dynamically? And that brings me to my second epiphany, and that is that events bubble up throughout the DOM. Let me repeat that. Events bubble up throughout the DOM. And let me explain just for a second what this means. This means that when I click on a button, the button has an event listener and it knows how to handle that event. It knows to call this function. But subtly, in the background, what also happens is that event bubbles up to this div, to this container, and then to eventually to the body tag, and you can attach listeners to these events and they can handle that event. Even if you clicked on the button, the event in the background is going to bubble itself up throughout the DOM through all of its parents, and you can listen for events there. And why is this important? Well, like I said, when I am attaching click listeners to all of these buttons, but I might dynamically create another button and then it wouldn't have the listener on it. So how would I handle that situation? I can tell this div to listen for the event, and when I click on any button or anything inside of it, it's going to bubble up to the list, to the div, and that div will know how to handle it. So let's go here and let's actually slightly alter this syntax. In jQuery 1.8, they're really encouraging people not to write functions this way. They want to write listeners by using the on method. And on you can write 2 ways. The first way is just passing 2 arguments. So you pass the name of the event and the function to run when that event occurs. So this is exactly the same as what I just had, but this is slightly better syntax, and you're going to see why in 1 second. But I'm saying when the document is ready, attach a click listener to the button, and I just write it on, and then the event, and then the function. So if I go to my code, you're going to see this is still going to work. It's still going to work exactly as we said. But the reason it's great to write functions this way is because you can actually tell tell a DOM element to listen for events on a different DOM element, right? I want to listen for clicks on a button from the div. So I'm going to say the button list on the click event, but on a button. A click on a button. So I'm going to click a button, any button, and it's going to bubble up to the parent element, and the parent element can then capture it and run, code based on it. So I'm going to say button list, listen for clicks on the button, and if I reload the page, this will still load. This will still run just as you'd expect, but now if I run that code and append a button, it will still work. It'll work even though I'm just now adding it into the DOM. And that's because I'm listening for it, on the div. I'm listening for the bubbled up, event instead of the event itself. And that was my second realization. And the fact that you could, use this on method to listen for events on child elements, so you can even respond to events on elements that are not in the DOM when you initially run it, that really helped me. That really helped me feel comfortable because I'm loading things onto the page all the time. That's kind of the point of JavaScript. And, this really, really helped me understand what was going on. So now let's go to epiphany number 3, right? I would always see this, this kind of syntax going on where someone's like function do something. Oh, TextMate went wild there. And I'm like, what is that E? Like what is going on here, and why do people do that, and what does that mean? And you know what? Like everything else that I'm starting to find about programming, it's really not that difficult. It's just kind of intimidating, but once you wrap your head around it, it makes a lot of intuitive sense. So this is how I would go about figuring out what that frickin' E is and how to use it. Let's say button dot on click, using our new syntax that's better. Let's run a function and let's pass that E into it. And let's just console.log the E. Let's see what the hell is going on there. So run the localhost, click a button, and I get this. It's an object. It is a JavaScript object, and it's called p.event, whatever that means. I have no idea what that P means. But what is actually happening, and this E, and this, help me understand why it's even called E, is really short for something called event object. It is the event object. It is the event itself that just occurred. That is what E is. It's the event object. That is, that is epiphany number 3. E is actually the event object. And you shorten it and you write E, but you're talking about the event object. So if we go back and look at this, this is the event itself. When I clicked the button, that click that just happened, like that click I just made on the page, that's the event, and it's actually a JavaScript object with attributes, right? And they have attributes that might be really useful for you. They have a page X attribute. That is the X coordinate on the page where that event happened, right? And the Y attribute, that could be super useful to know. Maybe I want to, database every click a user makes on my page, and instead of having to pay someone $1 million to run website analysis on me, I can just log events on clicks, and I can see where users are clicking on my page and how to better, create my website. I can see the type of event that occurred, which is a click, and that, might be obvious, but there's a whole bunch of things, and I encourage you to play around and look at all these different things that have to do with the event that just occurred. And, this is going to be really useful for you to kind of have this event object and play around with it. So let's, instead of console.logging the E, let's create a variable, because I want to have it even after the function ends. Let's say var event object, and just call it now, and let's set the event object equal to E when the button's clicked. So let's click a button, and now I'm going to have this event object here, which is the event itself. So what are useful methods to call it? Well, probably the most useful thing that you can do is find out what the target of the event was. So if I click button 1, the event object dot target is actually the DOM element. That is the DOM element on which the event occurred. And that's really useful to know, because if I clicked a different button and then, called event object.target, I would see that it's a different DOM element. So I can actually differentiate different elements in the DOM that the same event occurred on by capturing the event object and then calling .target. If I wanted the HTML, I can call inner HTML and get the actual text that, from the element that was clicked. So if I have a bunch of list items and I want to display one up here, I can grab the HTML of it and, recreate it up there. So there's a lot that you can do. Knowing that you have access to this event object with a ton of different, information that you can get about it is super useful. Knowing the event is great. Like, let me give you another example. I'm creating right now a Jeopardy game, right? I'm creating a game where you can go through the JArchive questions and actually play Jeopardy against your friends. And one of the things that's like an important feature is that when you press the space bar, it allows you to buzz in. And I want it to respond to the space bar. And one question would be like, hey, how do you do that? How do you get someone to buzz in when they click the space bar and all this code runs? And you can do that if you understand events and the event object and how that works. So instead of saying button.onClick, I'm going to change my scope of this event to the window. So any event that occurs, and I'm going to pass it the event key press. So that's saying when any key is pressed, let's run a function and capture the event object as E, and let's just console.log E. So let's reload this page here, and I'm just going to press the A key. I'm just pressing A, and we'll see what happens. Well, I got a console.log of the event, the p.event, and let's open it, and we got all these attributes. I have the type key press, which makes sense, and then I get this other thing, this key code 97. What is going on there? Well, it turns out that's actually an ASCII code, ASCII, and if you go to this link right here, ASCIItable.com, it has a list of all the values of each key. You'll see here 97 for the lowercase a. So I want to respond, to events on the spacebar. Whenever someone hits the spacebar, run a function. And I see that it has a code here of 32. So I can kind of like start to understand how I would go about creating this code. Like, the event object itself has an attribute called keycode, and I know for the spacebar it's 32. So let's see if I can, run a function. I'm saying window.onKeyPress, run a function, and let's just make a simple if statement here. I'm going to use the ternary notation. So if e.keycode is equal to 32, then let's start by hiding this red box, because I'm going to use the red box to simulate my buzzer, like my buzz-in system. Let me just hide it when the page loads. Or actually, for my purposes, it'll be easier if I don't hide it. I just set the opacity to 0. Because when you hide something, that actually sets the CSS property display to none, as opposed to just setting the opacity to 0. Setting the opacity to 0, it's still displayed on the page, you just can't see it. And then I'm going to say if the key code is 32, so if the event that just happened has an attribute of key code 32, which is the key that is pressed as the space bar, then I want, some animation. I want the red box to animate in. I'm going to just fade it in. I'm going to say opacity to 1 in 300 seconds, then delay 300 seconds, and then fade it out. So that's going to simulate like a buzz in, right? So I think that'll just simulate it buzzing in, and it'll only capture it on clicks to the space bar. So let's see if that works. It's hidden. I'm going to press a lot of stuff. I'm pressing keys. Nothing's happening. I'm clicking. Nothing's happening. And now I'm going to press the space bar, and that's my buzz in. That's the visual representation that I'm buzzing in. And it only captures it on events to the space bar, because I'm saying, give me the event object. And if the event object itself has an attribute called key code of 32, which represents a click on the spacebar only. Then run this function that's going to be my buzz-in function. So you can start to see how understanding like the event object is really useful for you, because you can get all these attributes, right? I can say if only a user clicks on a certain aspect of my page, do something, and use that page X, page Y to kind of understand. And there's a ton of events you can capture to. So, just to wrap up, remember that everything in jQuery follows a pattern of when something happens, select something, do something. Remember that events bubble up through the DOM, so you can capture them in different places than where they occur. And remember that this E, don't be intimidated by it. It's just the event object itself. It's the event that occurred. The event is not a DOM element, but if you call e.target, then that gets you the DOM element that the event occurred on. So those three epiphanies really helped kind of solidify me working with jQuery events and JavaScript events, and I feel a lot more comfortable now. So hopefully if you're just starting out with this stuff, that's kind of like a helpful overview of some pitfalls not to fall into. And it'll help you save you a little bit of time and frustration by kind of helping you give you like a frame of mind to understand how to work with these things going forward. So hope that was helpful for you, and remember, always be coding. Always be coding. Thanks.